back to, the Atari and the joystick, right? I mean, it was super easy for dad to jump in with the joystick and the one button because it wasn't an overly complicated controller. Now there's 40 buttons, or people are playing video games on a computer keyboard. So I think the whole notion is, as parents, I think first of all, we can't just, say we can't understand this technology and walk away. We have to be active and a part of it.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to sit down and chat all things data, entrepreneurship, leadership, even politics. It's a pleasure to have you here, man.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thanks for the invite. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
As I've gone through my life, I find computer science and data more and more interesting. It is not something, I think, in reflection, that I ever thought that I would be interested in, especially growing up, just constantly playing sports, be exposed to sports. My entire life was sports. Not that I looked down upon computer science and anything of the sort of mathematics, et cetera, but it just wasn't really in my orbit. And as I've gotten older, you really realize that the world that we live in, the cogs that move the machine are data and computer science. You cannot go anywhere. Well, you could, but it would take some skill without your phone. So I'm curious, at what point in your life did you become obsessed with the power of data?
It's kind of funny. I mean, I probably started out just like you. I mean, my early years were really just kind of middle of the road type of stuff, sports, friends, things like that. And I kind of jokingly say that my foray into technology was really just the point in time where I graduated. So when I left college, the first job I took up, they basically said, "We've got this computer stuff we don't know how to do." So I was like an intern in a department, and it was like, okay, can you key this into Lotus 123 for us? I mean, that'll age me a little bit, right? It's like, yeah, how hard can it be? I can't break it at all. And basically, not being afraid of technology allowed me to kind of start to pave a path where, I was a little more proficient than anybody else and willing to try more things out, and kind of, because people around me were scared of themselves. I mean, when I started my career, think about the old mainframe CRTs on somebody's desktop and keying stuff in there, and I'm the first person who had the PC on the desk because I was the only person who knew how to boot it up and do some basic things with. So that's really how I got into it, was just no one else, understood this stuff. I mean, I grew up with a computer in the home, and not that I coded or anything, but I had a level of comfort that allowed me to kind of go in and try more things out, and it just kind of set me down a path of being in technology.
Was there any sentiments of like outcast within the professional setting, like going into that and really embracing this kind of nuance area where, like you said, other people were maybe a little turned off by it? Like, was there any concern that maybe you were investing your time in the wrong place?
No, it's kind of funny because I have friends that I grew up with that dove deep. I mean, I had a friend that, one of my best friends from high school, he was the guy that took everything apart. He was the first guy to figure out how to code stuff on his own. So I saw what he and my other friends were doing. I'm like, okay, those guys are so far down the road for me. I will never catch up in this realm of technology. So, I mean, I kind of describe it as kind of like a blue collar approach that, kind of gut it out and figure it out. And just that, that notion of trying things. And then all of a sudden everyone realized in the department, Chris can figure this out, call him over and he'll be able to open the application, or he'll know what this command means or whatever. And that's kind of how it just took traction, is just kind of being the one guy in the office is willing to kind of try and not afraid to break it. And we all kind of have that parents like, well, I don't know if I hit this key if I'm going to break the computer. You're not going to break the computer, right? But I mean, think about kind of growing it up in an office where 90% of the people around you, that was their fear. They were afraid of breaking technology. Like, okay, if you open it and the program crashes, you just open it again, or Control-Alt-Delete, right? I mean, these things aren't detrimental, but, there was this fear of again, this had to be late 80s, early 90s. Computers weren't really mainstream. Personal computers weren't mainstream in a professional setting.
Right.
Maybe the secretary had one, but it wasn't at scale. So it's just that willingness to kind of jump in and try stuff out started me down the path.
It is really remarkable to think back. I mean, even, I'm 33 now. I still have memories of pre-computer time. Like, I remember when we got our first Mac, and the thing, I mean, dude, remember the first, big flat screen televisions you put in your living room, and it's like 85% of the wall in the room, and it's got that big back. I mean, this thing was a monstrous rock of a computer, and the hard drive was huge. And it would take, 50, it's like starting your car in wintertime. Like, you got to turn the thing on and wait, and then it makes these horrible noises. And you could do a couple Word documents on there, and you could play that game where, you shoot the planes out of the sky as they fall down.
Yeah.
And to go from that, just not even as a kid, like not really even seeing the potential, or even being a kid that was thinking about the potential of what that would be, to how much it is integrated into every single second of my life as an adult.
Yeah.
Did you feel that writing on the wall?
I don't know if I felt the writing on the wall, but I think in my own case, the fact that I was at least a half a step ahead of everybody else, I knew the questions were going to come my way. So if there was a new application getting rolled out, I spent a little more time getting familiar with it, because then someone's going to say, well, the kid knows how to do it. He'll figure this out, right? So that kind of was the foray into it. So I think being that step ahead of everybody, allowed me to kind of start to, I would say probably start to develop the sense of where things could go, which is really kind of proliferate through my consulting career of maybe I don't know this point in time, or I don't know this industry, but I can borrow examples where I see other things going and bring them back to the opportunity and say, okay, this is happening in, let's say, retail, or this is happening in financial services. We can use those as examples, say, right. But even back then, it's like, well, if this guy's using a spreadsheet to do this, well, maybe I can use a spreadsheet to do that. So It was kind of just pushing the edges a little bit of seeing what was possible. So when someone's like, how did you figure out? I'm like, I don't know, a spreadsheet does these 4 things. It could probably do this 5th thing as well.
Right. Yeah, it's remarkable how many things you can monitor within a business. I mean, there was this one episode of, I forget the name of the show. It's hosted by Guy Raz. How this is made, or something like that. Great. I'm going to completely butcher the name of the show, right? But they had interviewed this woman she did this TED Talk about dating, and she had basically used Excel to find her partner. And so she had categorized every single date that she had been on, ranked them, sorted them, developed small equations to work through them, and then ultimately select for the best quality, like the most necessary qualities down to the least necessary, and cross-reference them against people within her spreadsheet. And I just thought that was such an interesting utilization of, again, what maybe in the past would have just looked at as like some kind of nerdy computer program that, why would I ever need to know that? And here someone is like propelling their love life forward. It's pretty cool.
Well, it's fun. I'll give you my own example. So when we named our daughters, right, my wife and I went through the whole list of names we had in a spreadsheet. So she's an accountant. I'm a consultant by background. So
masters of the spreadsheet.
Exactly. And what's funny is you want to talk about how spouses can have arguments. It's how do you use Excel? Right. We could not have 2 different ways of using Excel. She uses all the shortcuts and there's a whole different set of financial commands. I'm doing a whole different set of like sorts and pivots and whatnot. I mean, it's like different kind of arguments happen sometimes. But to the example you're using, right? So we had all the names for our daughter, both our daughters, on a spreadsheet, and we had like a power ranking. We had like different criteria. So each column had a different level of criteria. And then you start to filter like which ones, start to remove themselves because, okay, well, someone knew a cousin with that name, or there was a person in school, or didn't really like the sound with the whole name worked out together. So yeah, we had a power ranking that worked through in a spreadsheet. Both of our daughters' names. They actually asked for those files today. We have to dig them up, but they actually want to see what their options were.
Why wasn't I C5 or B6?
Yeah.
Do you feel like, has there ever been, and maybe this is more of like a macro concern about data, but a point at which you feel like the collection of data and the analysis of data had led you pretty far astray from what you were after? And how should we be controlling for that type of thing in a decision-making process?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I it's interesting. A few years ago, I did a presentation on data-driven decision making, and I think that when you look at decision making, you can't divorce yourself from kind of the context, the experience that you have, and the knowledge you have, and what the data tells you. And I think if you index too far on either side of that, you get to an answer that doesn't mean anything, right? So, for example, when you talk to an executive and they say, "How'd you make that decision?" I use gut. You made like one of the most important decisions of your life and you used your gut. Well, there's probably some calculus that goes on there, but they rely probably 70% on instinct and 30% on experience and data. But I think you can go so far the other way that you can see things in data that don't make sense. I mean, a classic example is like whenever someone tries to, correlate events, right? There's a correlation between these events.
Like ice cream
correlation
sales
doesn't
and
mean
crime.
causation.
Right.
What's that?
like crime sales and ice cream sales,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
like
yeah.
crime and ice cream sales. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, you can find statistical correlation across anything you want, but if you don't bring context to that, it doesn't make sense in the real world. And when you have things like artificial intelligence and some of the machine learning capabilities that are out there, I mean, sometimes people just where I think there's a big gap, especially when large organizations think they're going to adopt AI as an example, they think just turn on the magic AI machine and magic will shuffle to the top.
yeah,
And it really doesn't work that way, right? I mean, there'll be mathematically stuff may shuffle to the top, right? Because basically it's all correlations. It's all figuring out averages and means and seeing what shakes out. But if you don't bring context to the situation, it's not gonna mean anything. So you'll hand a decision over to somebody. It's like, well, what do you mean blue cars sold in November with 3 tires are going to sell more? Well, the data says it. That makes no sense, right? So you have to have context.
yeah, it's going to be wild as artificial intelligence continues to integrate itself within our day-to-day life, within the decision-making process of companies, and how we maintain the human element in there, and maybe where should we maintain the human element within the decision-making process. Because I feel like as a human, it's going to be tough when we start to let some of that go, which, I mean, my personal views are that it's a little bit inevitable, especially because of the power of the decision-making skills around continually improving programs. But we are going to want to be involved because it's our innate desire to be participating in the decision-making process. But it sounds like, I mean, listen to what you're saying, like there's a fine line there somewhere.
Yeah, yeah.
To be
Yeah, I mean, a
navigated.
guy that I worked with years ago had a way of describing it, and the example he would say is like when you went into a store and maybe you were looking at, I don't know, bed linens, and you walk out and you didn't buy one, and all of a sudden you get a pop up from the store, hey, bed linens are on sale on aisle 6. In his mind, that's when it starts to get creepy, right? So his hypothesis, and he's a consultant I worked with a few years ago, is like you want to kind of be creepy -1. Right, when you start to use those tools, right? You don't want to make someone like someone's looking over your shoulder and they're gonna, they're right in your business. But if someone's walking out the store, that might be a time to send a pop-up. Hey, listen, we have a special on linens. Okay, well, I was in the linen section, and context kind of makes sense. But once you leave the store and you get in the car, it pops up. It's like, all right, this is maybe a little too much. So, I think that's the real challenge, and a lot of people are now speaking and talking about where AI starts to become intrusive, where models are making decisions that have no context. I mean, some of the classic examples, there's actually a book that was written a few years ago called Weapons of Math Destruction. And what it really talks about is the misuse of data and the implications. So, for example, we talk about like crime, crime in certain cities and how police are hired and how certain precincts are, they're covered from a crime perspective. Well, they go back to reports, handwritten reports from 50, 60 years ago, and they're still policing based upon human bias in those reports. Yeah, and old data that didn't have any sort of, it was filled with bias. So, but a lot in this example here, right? They're still allocating police forces and whatnot into these communities based upon these old human bias based written reports. So that's the thing where AI becomes really interesting is you can prove anything you want in the math, but you also have to recognize the kind of bias either that's in the data or the bias of the person who's actually doing the work with the data itself. Like, do they lack cultural context, or is there academic bias? Like, what kind of things are they bringing into it that might be influencing a model?
It almost seems like there will have to be some sort of governing body of intellectuals to make informed decisions around this kind of stuff, because it's going to get the problem is going to get more complex as the technology improves, which I mean, the example I always return to, which I find interesting, is you look at 1980s, the development of video games and the Atari. So you have one joystick, one red button, one very low resolution screen, and between a 44-year period, you have basically full immersion, virtual reality, augmented reality experiences that people are going through that produce real neurological reactions. Dopamine can actually be released through something that is, by a previous definition, not real. It's not actually happening in your immediate environment. It's happening in the creation of environment, and that's a 44-year period. That is not. It's not even a grain of sand in the beaches of time. It is nothing, and that is such a leap. Now, assume a very, very low rate of progression, near nothing, and just push the timeline out. What's 300 years like? What's 500 years like?
Yeah.
And the amount of integration from person to person within our life, given, our Apple Watches, our iPhones, our computers, like it won't be undone, I guess is what I'm getting at. So how are we going to learn to live with it and then live with it intelligently so that we can make informed choices about our integration with artificial intelligence? I don't even think that's a question. But
I think it's an interesting topic to explore. I think one thing is, what do they say? That the time between, I want to say like the 40s and now, we've progressed more than we have from like any other time in history, right? So like the printing press to Columbus and all these kinds of, everything, the timeline is compressed and the rate of innovation and technology is skyrocketing. And I think that, what we're in right now is, you and I bring our childhood experiences. Like when I was a kid, you'd call somebody's house when you want to see if you can get together and play, or you'd knock on the door, right? Now my kids are texting on an iPad, their friends, and, the friend doesn't have an iPad or a text, then, they're not keeping those connections. Like, let's go knock on the door. Who does that? I did, right? Yeah. So I think what's happening is you and I are bringing context of a different experience set. Right. So when we see people that's like, the classic example, years ago, one of my first consulting projects, I did it for a telephone company, a big telecom. And, people were like a cube next to each other. And this is before IM was prolific. They're messaging the person one cube over of how they would engage. It's like versus step over the wall and say, hey, I got a question for you. But as a telephone company, they were used to using technology to engage anyways, and it was just a natural thing. But it's like we're seeing these things start to build up, and people aren't, kind of going beyond it. And you and I kind of say, well, get up, walk around. These things make complete sense, but technology is filling some of that role. I think to one degree, it's like it's happening quickly, and we bring that historical context. I think the other thing too is, we can use COVID as an example. Anyone with a kid during COVID in this last cycle saw their kids take to these technologies, and parents are scared now.
Right.
But that's the world these kids are living in, right? So, for example, like using my daughters, if they can't find a friend that they can text with, then, it doesn't occur to them the other options or avenues to engage.
Interesting.
Because that's the community that they're building.
Right.
So I think, at a point in time, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I think you get a few years out. And, our good old days will be like when we did, played in the streets and didn't care about traffic and, car, get out of the street, then get back in, right? Theirs are going to look a little bit different, and it's not going to be wrong, but they're going to grow up around, they're going to be familiar with it. And I think the other part too is they're going to have those signals like, okay, when I've gone too far with technology or when someone's misusing it, like we have all these red flags, they're figuring theirs out for their context and culture.
I feel like there's also there's the fact that a lot of these artificial intelligent integrations and emergings with technology are really beneficial. They're wonderful. They're great. To, be able to navigate, for example, through a city safely from A to B with zero mistakes while you pay attention to what's going on the road, that's a huge plus. Or being able to, my grandmother lives in Maine. She doesn't live near me. We're much more siloed in our existence, I think, as humans than we were in the past, where you had like a more nuclear unit of people close to each other, and then the younger kids take care of the older family. But being able to FaceTime with my grandmother, that's the same experience for both of us. That's amazing to have an actually emotionally stimulating person-to-person experience without actually physically having to buy the plane ticket, go there and do that, which to both of our lives would be an inconvenience in some cases. That's a huge win. Then that's not even touching on the entire like medical healthcare use of a lot of technologies, which are greatly benefiting us as a society and as a world.
Hmm.
but it's that fear of like losing your human element in it. But the thing that's really interesting to me is I have like kind of two concerns with it. One is that technology takes over our life, but then the other one is technology frees up our life, right? Because we can become wildly more efficient with the time that we do use to do things and produce stuff. And
Hmm.
then there's the possibility that that now opens up all this time that, you know, maybe historically was spent doing aspects of hard labor or relationship management, that now you can spend more time with your family, your friends, your community that might have been closed off. So it's these two possible worlds that we don't really get to know what the expression will be until we're there. But
Right.
I'm not convinced that, I mean, like I said in the past, I'm very like pro integration with AI. I think it's going to be good, a net positive, but it is interesting that there's always those two kind of possibilities there.
Well, but I think anytime technology, presents itself, you kind of have those two possibilities, right? I mean, and it's really going to be kind of in the hands of the creator, right? When you
Right.
give someone these tools, I mean, in medicine, right? I mean, there's techniques that, people in the right hands can do amazing things with, and in the wrong hands can do disastrous things with. So I think it's, to some degree, it's that freedom what technology does, and kind of our own will and ability to explore and try to figure these things out. I think the AI stuff gets really interesting because, you know, to some degree, I think this is kind of where you're going, right? AI gets, a really bad rap because you've got people like Elon Musk saying, get ready for Terminator kind of stuff, right? It's the
Right.
end of the world as we know because AI is going to be, unsupervised and take over all these things and make these malicious decisions. You got people like Mark Cuban's like, get on board because this is where it's going one way or another, right? And, I think we haven't figured those things out, right? So again, like anything else when technology presents itself, the morals, the ethics, the standards haven't presented themselves with. I mean, you made a comment a moment ago, and I could easily see a future state that almost like you have a company's financials get audited. I could see their AI get audited. Like,
Right.
let's see the models you're using. Let's see the bias that was built into them. How are you maintaining them? Because you can't just turn it on and walk away with these things either,
Right.
right? Because it's built on only the knowledge you have and the experience they have. Well, if you have it on for 6 months, now there's 6 months more worth of data.
Right.
The AI, those models, those tools should evolve and recognize that, for example, if Amazon recommended when you buy this shoe, you buy, these socks with it. Well, if no one's buying the socks, Amazon knows to stop promoting the socks, right? They'll promote something else.
Right.
So, I mean, it's the same kind of idea. Your models need to evolve with time. And I can see a future state where these models might have to go through some sort of model management and audit process just for some of those concerns.
What concerns do you have regarding AI, if any, of the future? Being someone, as knowledgeable as you are with data and its integration, specifically within business and the
Yeah.
decision making process, like what are kind of your red flags, shout from the mountaintop, that we should be talking about, be concerned about, and have discussions about?
Well, I think the first thing is recognizing that AI is not a panacea to solve all your business's problems. I mean, as a consultant, I've been in enough situations where, the CEO says, we're going to do all these things with data and make these great proclamations to Wall Street. And all of a sudden, someone in the back of the house says, right, how do I make these things happen, right? I mean, the technology isn't there, our skills aren't there, our people aren't there. So, I think that's where I start to get concerned. Someone just thinks the magic's going to happen when they start to do things with data and integrate in their systems. But at the same time, too, organizations that are so far the other direction, we don't have cloud computing, we don't have data scientists, we don't have engineers, so we're not going to do it at all. I think they're equally as poor off. I think what you have to do is, I think any organization getting started has to start to pick small, simple, demonstratable use cases and start to learn about the data they collect. Look at the data, do an analysis, compare that analysis with what they would have done historically, and just start to learn and iterate from there.
Right.
I mean, a lot of people talk about data like building data product, right? You have to try to treat these things like in a lab, like an R&D setting, try to understand how it works, and then scale up and scale out as you develop proficiency, and that'll help them make some decisions. And I think organizations that don't take that serious, people that oversell, I mean, there's a couple examples. I won't say companies, but anyone can look them up. I mean, there's been examples of companies who've led with AI and done commercial campaigns around AI, and they've fallen short on promises. I mean, there was an article written, I think Wired wrote the article, and they were basically talking about one of these technologies was deployed in a healthcare setting, and people with cancer thought they were going to be cured because there's the magic of this AI that was going to solve and cure their cancer, and it doesn't work that way, right? I mean, all the models were doing at that point in time was just reading all the literature on cancer and helping doctors make a better diagnosis. It wasn't curing cancer; it was just helping them process all the information about cancer that was out there. So that's where I start to get concerned. We start making these promises that aren't reasonably fulfilled, and then we start turning on models that we don't understand what they're doing. And it's not like it's not intentional or deliberate. It's like someone gets started, they think it works, and then they walk away, and no one's really kind of checking on what's going on in the back room.
Yeah, I listened to this interesting podcast between, I don't know if you're familiar with Sam Harris. He's a podcast host, a neuroscientist, and author. And he had this computer scientist named Eliezer Yudkowsky on. And they were just talking specifically about artificial intelligence, threats, concerns, positives. And Eliezer used this interesting example about a paperclip manufacturer. And if you were to optimize an artificial intelligent machine to produce as many paper clips as it possibly could, it is going to do that at the cost of everything, right? Because that's its one objective function, is to make paper clips. If it has to use, unchecked, use every single available resource in the known world to produce paper clips, it is going to do that. It will kill you. It'll kill your friends. It doesn't matter. Its one goal and function is to do this thing. So that if you take that example to any other situation, like, you do need to have a control, or at least a group of people that it's not just a light switch, right? It's a light switch with constant assessment, reevaluation, like you said, taking into account new information you're collecting over a time period to re-inform the original decision-making process, so that it adapts to make more informed choices, not just choices. And it seems like, because it's such a popular thing, integration of artificial intelligence for business, that unless you have a responsible group of people taking that on, then maybe it does pose a risk. So, like, how do you instill values around AI integration and uphold kind of a standard from company to company to company, despite competition, to make sure that these types of things are done in the right way? Because that to me seems like the challenge.
Well, I mean, I think a couple things. I think, first of all, one of the things I find, maybe comforting, if you will, in the process is inevitably someone who understands the technology gets pulled into the conversation, and they can kind of help set the record straight. Like right. I mean, I think one of the things that's made AI really a complicated topic is you've got the science fiction view of AI, right? Terminator and whatnot. And then you've got kind of the, someone who just completely marginalizes and dismisses it. We can do the same thing with people, or with a simple, prediction model, and we don't need to go that far. So once you kind of get to people who actually understand how the technologies work, I think there's a really good level set there. For example, a friend of mine who works in healthcare, I mean, they want to do all these things with AI, and inevitably he's kind of like, okay, there's a cost, right? We can build everything you want in AI, but there's a cost, right? There's a processing cost, a computing cost, a resource cost, a data cost. I mean, there's all these costs associated. So we have to be very clear and specific about where we're going to deploy these technologies and for what purpose, and then make sure that that when they're on and running, there's a cost to maintain them and keep them current. So, to some degree, you have these people who have these wish lists, and then you get to the pragmatists and say, okay, it fits in these certain use cases, we can do it. And then they can also kind of separate I know what you're trying to accomplish, just don't use the word AI and I can get you there. I mean, so there's those kinds of conversations too.
Yeah, I can only imagine that the example I think of here is like with the atomic bomb, that you had this development of this bomb, and scientists that were pretty sure that it was going to do something, but they weren't 100% sure. But there was competition around the world to get this thing developed and test it. And so when they actually tested, they truly didn't know how it would go. And that blows my mind. That not stupid people didn't know how it would go. The smartest scientists in the world who had done it, who'd made it, and they were pretty sure. But on the other side of pretty sure, it was like global destruction. And they greenlit the thing. So then I see this somewhat of a similar environment in the world of, I mean, I guess anything that's going to involve artificially intelligent decision making is that there's this competitive element, right? That you
Yeah.
don't want to be last place in the race. And with your experience, do you feel like that's a fair concern, that competition within different markets, within different industries is going to lead to the actual real risk of artificial intelligence, of turning the on switch that can't be flipped off because you're trying to be the first to do it?
No, I mean, I don't. I mean, I think, I mean, let's use examples like Facebook, right? I mean, for all, I mean, one of the things that was fascinating is, I saw the movie, The Social Network. No, Social Network.
Yeah,
I'm drawing a blank on
social
it.
network.
No. Um, and I had my kids see it, right? And the whole notion was, you know, the technology is out there, and I think where groups exploit them. So the whole thing with Facebook, and for example, and they had kind of a mock of it was Facebook, and all the executives they interviewed with these companies, these technology companies, talk about their experience and exposure to these things.
Social dilemma.
Thank you.
Gotcha.
Thank
There
you.
we go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tristan Harris, right?
Yeah. Yes.
But I mean, that notion. So I think there's things that are going to keep it in check, right? I mean, and again, I think regulators are going to lean in. I mean, I think this is an example where, like, I go back to the example I said a moment ago. Like, at my first job, I was the kid who was kind of willing to push technology a little bit, without who knew if I'd break it.
Right.
Now we see those kinds of conversations happening at the legislative level. I mean, they're bringing in these executives and these companies, like, explain how these things work.
Right.
At some point in time, the people asking the questions will have enough context to say, hey, listen, I know what you've sold everybody. I know what you're telling your shareholders. Here's where this will and won't work, and here's where we're going to start to regulate you. So I think those things will start to present themselves. I think, and the question is, will the behaviors of companies and individuals get so far ahead that by the time regulators come in behind, it's too late?
I guess, yeah.
Or
that's
will there
more
be
my
an
concern.
opportunity to kind of reel them in sooner? And I think it really reflects. I mean, I think it's an important point in our country too. It's just our political activism, right? I mean, are we sending people into the conversations that actually have the technical acumen to ask the right questions?
Right.
I mean, when you have an 80-year-old senator who, who's still working with a BlackBerry, they're not qualified
Right.
to ask Zuckerberg what he's doing with Facebook.
Well, and you see that in these congressional hearings when Zuckerberg's
Exactly.
up on the stand. It's almost like they're just speaking different languages. I mean, the questions don't land because there's such a gap between the understanding of the representatives and then the person that they're putting on trial, essentially.
Yeah.
As someone who's invented Facebook.
Yeah.
And then someone
It's like,
who's
I've
been
legally, technically answered your question. Next question, right? As
Right.
opposed, like, you didn't actually get the answer you were looking for, but he can check the box because he's got his attorney saying, just say this and move on.
And maybe it's a positive that we're having these stumblings now when, the at least seemingly immediate risks of artificial intelligence aren't race threatening, right? Aren't planetary threatening. And so we can have stumbles.
And I would say that, it's applied in so many different disciplines too, right? I mean, while you've got Silicon Valley in this arms race of being able to predict consumer behavior and make recommendations and get people to stick on the app and use it for as long as possible, you also have a global setting where people are using these technologies in different ways. I mean, one of the things we often hear is how the U.S. is behind, for example, China, when it comes to their exploration, understanding, and investment in AI, right? You've got a government that's dedicating resources to it versus entrepreneurs who are trying to solve kind of consumer-based problems around it.
Right.
So I think that, I think that, in the consumer setting, our risks are probably manageable because if someone does something malicious, reputation, takes them down quickly and people move away from the platform. I think that I think we should be exploring the outer limits should be in those academic and those government levels because we have to know what's possible with these tools. I mean, if you can turn on a switch and take down somebody's, infrastructure because you develop the tools and they can predict, consumption patterns and whatnot. I mean, there's real consequence behind it. I think we have to have really smart people understanding, how far this can go and be prepared for it.
Are there concerns, you personally being a father and having children that are interacting with technology at such a young age? I think back, my fiance and I talk about this all the time. What a hellish time to be going to high school. I mean, high school, when I was in high school, I personally liked it, but athletics were, the large majority of my time, so I was very consumed. I enjoyed high school, but still, high school it's nasty. I mean, it's a petri dish of people who don't know what's going on yet, don't know who they are just privy to make fun of the next person for no reason, and the popularity contest that exists wasn't numerical. It was suggested. It was kind of like, oh, you think this person might be popular, they might be nerdy, whatever. It doesn't matter in hindsight, but there was no way to quantify it. Now it's quantifiable. I couldn't imagine being in a classroom where the measuring stick is followers on a social media app or views on a video, and what kind of psychological changes that would be making in an already very fertile mind. It's super malleable.
Yeah.
So are there, knowing what you know about data, right, and how these companies are operating to try to maximize the time that we spend on them, our utilization of them, how much we're watching, and then to have children that are coming up in that, how do you manage that?
You've just nailed my entire summer conversation with my oldest daughter. No, but I think you're dude, you've nailed it. I mean, because that's one of the things I think as parents you've got to be really cognizant of. And I mean, there's a guy that's doing some work with me, and he's got a 14-year-old daughter, and we were sharing stories. And one of the things he says is, as a parent, you have to be the one to be looking at these technologies before your kid brings it to you. Right. And if you think about things like, if it's Snapchat or TikTok or Fortnite or any one of these things that these kids are getting involved with, you go back to, the Atari and the joystick, right? I mean, it was super easy for dad to jump in with the joystick and the one button because it wasn't an overly complicated controller. Now there's 40 buttons, or people are playing video games on a computer keyboard, right? I mean, so I think that the whole notion is, as parents, I think, first of all, we can't just, say we can't understand this technology and walk away. We have to be active and a part of it. Right. So for example, again, we have a huge discussion here because my daughter wants TikTok. I've got views why I don't think she needs TikTok yet. She's got some friends on it. So we kind of said, okay, we're going to roll out an app at a time over the summer because we recognize this is how this social group is communicating. So right now the one she wants to use is Snapchat. So fine, we're going to use Snapchat. We're going to be on the accounts with you. We're going to be a part of monitoring and being a part of the process as she adopts it. And then once we have a level of proficiency and comfort, then we can go on to the next app. So your friends may get out ahead of you, but that's kind of how it plays. What's interesting is, in the community that I'm a part of with other parents, we're all comparing notes back and forth. So I gave you an example of the one friend of mine who says, you got to be doing it with your kids. We've got friends that say absolutely no technology. Summer, all the technology goes away, and the kids get thrown outside to play in the yard. Well, that's the world you and I grew up in, but the challenge there is that that's not where their community is necessarily existing. Right. So you can't say no, because that's where they're building their social network. That's where they're building their tools. That's where they're building their community engagement. Because guess what? When they're 30 and 40, those will be the tools they grew up using. As opposed to think back to my grandparents saying, when we grew up, we had the party line. It was one line and went to 6 houses, and if somebody was on, you had to wait your turn, right? I mean, that. So I think part of it's like, it's here. And I think parents have to be involved. They have to be engaged. They can't pretend it doesn't exist. I think the other thing too, and this is actually, it goes back to some of the other stuff we were talking about before, is I think we have to take advantage of some of the resources that are in place as parents as these technologies are rolled out. I'll give you an example. The same friend of mine has gone through a really scary situation with his daughter that basically had a kid in the school that just became a stalker to her and was sending her messages. And the first set of messages that went out were from a personal account. And the school's like, well, it's a personal account. We can't get involved. Right. Once the messaging went through the school technology, then the school could get involved.
So I see what you're saying. So you're basically leveraging a loophole, a good loophole, but you're leveraging a loophole to help remedy the situation that isn't inherently designed within the app or the legal structure.
Yeah. So for example, our school has he's a pretty solid technology expert. Mm-hmm. So I've met him a couple of times. So when we were talking about getting my kids set up with accounts, I'm like, everything is going to be set up with their school email address. Right. Because I know that the school monitors all the behaviors going through the school Gmail and all those things. So that if something's wrong, he can step in and he can see all the records and have the appropriate level of engagement and involvement. Because, I mean, that's they've equipped him to do. I mean, it's kind of the contra of years ago when they said, don't set stuff on your work computer because IT can figure it out.
Right.
Right. Well, now it's being deployed in academia. So now I advocate for my daughters to be using their school accounts
Well, see, so
because the school can monitor them.
here's an example of like, it's that coin flip again, right? So on one side of it, you have, I mean, for a high school or middle schooler, your
Well, it's a middle school. Yeah, yeah.
so to experience stalking in middle school, in and of itself is horrible.
Hmm.
To experience technological, it's like one more onion layer that doesn't really make sense for that age group. Or I mean, even even as an adult, that's not a welcomed experience at any point in your life.
Right.
But on the flip side of that, I had never even thought about this until you just said it, but it's really interesting to have like a technology or data expert at a school to help manage these kind of things within the flow of communication amongst kids. In talking through this, there's definitely big brother concerns here of like how much monitoring and oversight do you want in that setting when you're trying to learn how to make mistakes and move forward as a kid. But at the
Hmm.
same time, if you could quell really nasty behavior on the fringes of how children are communicating with each other, then there's like a really strong use case
Right.
for artificial intelligence and data collection. Because if you're like, okay, look, every time that kids get on the network at this time and they talk about this, or this, statistically to like, 95%, it's going to produce this outcome. And
Yep.
and as a school, as a group of parents, as a whatever, a homeowners association, if it's in your community, this is an outcome we don't want. So let's work backwards from this problem and then try to correct it in the behavior. And so that could be a really huge thing for
Yeah.
development within a school. And maybe it could produce, talking points and open communication channels between faculty and
Yeah.
students
And
to
again, I
talk
think
about
that's
things that were
yeah.
off the table before, not because no one would, but because they didn't even know the table was there in the first place.
Yeah. I think, but it starts. I think with again, parents have to understand what the options that are out there, and they have to be a part of the technology conversation with their kids. Just like doesn't give us, the free pass. Like,
Yeah.
it's like drinking, just like driving, like all those coming of age things. Just because we didn't grow up with those technologies. So listen, we didn't have TikTok as a kid, so I just say don't use it. Okay, it doesn't work, right? We've learned you can't tell a teenager abstaining doesn't work. So
Right.
you've got to find a way to keep up the conversation and say, here's my concerns. Here's why I think, here's a good way to use the technology. Here's the way I struggle with these technology. I'll give you an example. My daughter, we're talking about Snapchat, and we laid down some pretty firm rules. First of all, no pictures other than of you, right? So if your sister's falling asleep on the couch, you can't take a picture of her. You can't take a picture of friends because, one of the things I think a lot about is the whole notion of facial recognition, how that's proliferating. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's talk about rights to privacy, right? I mean, do I have a right to privacy if I'm walking down the street and your cam picks a picture up of me?
Right.
Should I infer a right to privacy? And that's a whole different discussion. But I want to kind of make sure she knew some guidelines that when she would adopt these technologies, how I felt it was appropriate that it was used. Right. And the other part too is at any point in time when I asked for the device, you hand it over, no questions asked. Not close what you're doing, not clear up your messages.
Right.
We're going to do. I mean, and it's really meant for when you see things that are questionable or uncertain, or you want to get involved with, you can have a conversation. So the other part then too is when you see things you don't understand, as opposed to like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you posted this.
Right.
You have to have a conversation. Why did you post this? What's the story behind it? Because these words could be inferred a different way.
Right.
And now it's a message that's out there and you don't know where people take it. So it's, I mean, what it comes down to, like we talk about, people running in politics or CEOs of companies, like they're really polished on their language. Mm-hmm. All right. It's the same kind of thing now. You kind of think as like your own PR person, when you put these things out, you can't just say something flippant because they can have consequence.
I was talking with a friend about this the other day. I'm like, I'm so glad that we went through college before social media existed. I mean, we graduated college and 2 years later, Instagram really came to prominence.
Mm-hmm.
And you're managing your brand all the time, and you're doing your own PR all the time, whether you know it or not. And there's just so many instances where, again, you're not doing anything wrong or illegal. You're young.
Yeah.
And I say this from my ivory tower at 33, right? Like, I'm young now. I make errors all the time, and to not have that categorized, backlogged, and dated and timestamped is pretty ideal. And that's not saying that you did a bunch of illegal stuff and you don't want it to come to surface. It's just you lived your life as a kid. You made dumb decisions as an adolescent, as everyone does, because you're learning how the world works.
Yeah.
But you think about, in middle school, for example. So if in the 90s, some kid wanted to give someone a naked picture of themselves, right? And violate someone else and their personal space and do this, they would have to physically take it, get it developed. It would have to make it past the developer at the Walmart.
Right. One of 24 exposures on the camera.
Right. That would have to slip through. Then they would have to physically get it, muster up whatever heinous courage they need to develop, and then physically give it to the person, and most likely be laughed out loud at immediately. Or worse, that person takes it and now they have this hard copy, right? There's zero barriers to entry at a lot of these points now. So someone could, maybe they're pressured by their friends, maybe it's a social situation and they don't know how to get out of it, and they do something like that. And now it's a major violation of someone else's privacy. It can be harassment, and it can all happen at the snap of a finger, And so if you are a parent and you're not considering these things, we talked about advisory boards or just groups that kind of are oversight for these kind of AI integrations and decisions. You kind of have to be doing what you're doing with your community, with your children.
Yeah. And you have to share notes.
Right. Not to be like some authoritarian, crazy parent, but just to be like, hey, let's just have it's like the birds and the bees conversation has big banged. And now there's an entire universe of birds and bees that you need to discuss with kids.
Yeah, it's just not the 1 or 2 dimensional you have like in your 5th grade health class anymore. Now it's 3 and 4 dimensions. But, I think the other part too is, I think it's about community as well. So, I mean, for example, as parents, we all kind of pass notes back and forth. For example, a good friend of mine went to a day-long workshop on parenting, and they had a cybersecurity guy present.
Wow.
And he was talking about, as a parent, things you need to be aware of. I mean, think about things like grooming. Like it's happening, right? So as a parent, you need to recognize who your kids are interacting with online, what they're doing online. Like, for example, a lot of the apps we don't allow our kids to use is when there's free-for-all chat. Amongst us was like, a really popular game. And they, and also we heard, okay, wait, what's going on? Who's talking to you? And then all of a sudden they fixed all that. There's no direct messaging. There's a couple of canned messages you can send now. So they went to some links to kind of make it still kid-friendly. So I think that it's, recognizing there's bad actors that are going to come in. You got to find ways to get involved. I think the other part, though, too, is, again, maybe my situation's fortunate. Of the group of kids that mine are a part of, we also know the parents.
Right.
So
there's group buy-in there.
It's like it takes a community, right? So, hey, listen, your kid said something to mine. I don't want to make a big deal about it. Right. I just want to show it to you so that you're aware, and then you can make the appropriate decision as a parent. Yeah. So there's some of those conversations back and forth. Like if someone were to bring to me a picture my kid would do that I thought was inappropriate, she does inappropriate, absolutely I would get involved and I'd ask some questions and try to make sure that, we could set things straight. And it's helping those kids work out the relationship. It's also the parents making sure that there's open line of communication amongst each other as well. I mean, I'll be the first to say my kids aren't perfect. They're going to make a lot of mistakes.
Right.
And you're going to see things that I don't see. So I need your help. And if you're willing for me to do the same with you, we're going to have a really good relationship and the kids are getting along great.
This almost seems like a micro sample size of the integration problem in society and business too, is that this is, I would imagine, unfortunately, that this is probably not the majority case for parenting groups across the country. One, to have a tight-knit group like that where you can communicate, and then two, have the foresight to be like, hey, we're as a team, all the parents in this group, all the kids' friends and so forth, we're going to approach this together. That way, no one's outcast if they make a mistake, but we can all approach it and treat it well. That's kind of that oversight type approach that you would need in the real world setting, to say like, hey, as a business owner, we integrated this technology and this was the outcome and it was bad. And to have the door open enough to where you can go to another company and talk about the shortcomings or the benefits of some of these choices. Because in the same way that, children can't be the ones left out. And the last thing that you want to be as a parent is the one that forces them to be left out. So if all the kids have cell phones, I remember when I was the last of my friends to get a cell phone. I got a little LG flip phone when I was 16. But I
got an old one in the corner out there. I was playing with the other day, showing it to my daughters.
I think it was probably maybe 8 months or so. And it really ended up being like a needs-based purchase that I was skiing, I was traveling, and we needed a way to keep in touch in case of emergencies. But it wasn't, you couldn't do anything there. You could text, but it was very limited, and texting was new, so it wasn't integrated into my social circle. And I remember I started to feel like I was missing the party, which is, you can expand that sentiment to any other situation, whether it's new clothes on the first day of school or getting into a certain after-school program or theater or sports, whatever it is. That feeling of being left out from whatever it is, and that being left out is out of your control, it kind of sucks when you're a kid. And your parents don't want that for you. They want you to feel happy and excited about your social life. And so we went back, as I'm sure a lot of parents do now, because the age to do this, I'm sure, is getting younger and younger, of like, okay, now we're going to get you a cell phone. And I was so psyched when I got it. Like, it really felt like a leg up in social communication, because it was. But you can't be the company that doesn't integrate the software that makes things cheaper, faster, and better. And you can't be the parent that forces your kid to sit on the sidelines of social development solely because of the risks that might be out there.
But I think the thread in that, though, is there's an opportunity cost on either path. Right. And, and I love the story you're sharing about, kind of being the latecomer to getting the technology. But, I think that, the other side too is, life's filled with disappointment, right? You're not going to get what you want. You're going to get a hand-me-down, used whatever. And, that in and of itself is a life experience. And I think, and I can see, I can see my kids going through the same thing. Like, cell phones are a great example. It's a hot topic right now. I mean, summer, kids are not in school anymore. And they're, and now some of them have cell phones. Well, what's been interesting is the first ones that got cell phones had a really compelling case. The parents were split, and that's how the whole family stayed connected, right? So the earliest cell phone adopters in our community here were really parents that had split up. So it's the only way to kind of keep track of where mom and dad and kid were, right? So it worked out really well. But then the other kids say, well, how come she has one and I don't? Well, their situation is not the same as ours.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, maybe a parent's a little more affluent, can go buy the next iPhone, 13, whatever. It's like, well, how come she got this? Because that's the decision her parents made, right? So, it's that, and we had them as kids growing up all the time too, right? New shoes, first one to get the car at 16, who got the new car versus had to go get that, part-time job to get the, Honda Civic that was all rusted out, right? I mean, we're going to experience that our whole lives. And I think that it goes back to something you were saying earlier, right? We're at a point as a society of like this notion of luxury and free time and privilege. Yeah. And I think that there's a balance, right? I mean, you can be on the cutting edge and bleeding edge of technology, but to some degree, you have to understand what those trade-offs mean. Like, if you're going to get the first phone, guess what? Next to someone's going to get the next newest version.
Right.
So if we see people always have to have the latest, and guess what? It's an arms race to who's got the coolest phone, and you're out, $1,500 every 6 months because you've got to get the latest version of whatever. So, I mean, seeing my kids go through it, I mean, I'll give you what we did. I mean, and we got some advice from other parents. Again, parents sharing information. When it came time for phones in our house, because they all wanted, they got Apple Watches. So they could text.
Oh, smart.
They could make phone calls, and it has a GPS, so I know where they are.
That's
can't
a nice
download
sell
apps
too, because Apple Watch is pretty cool.
Well, and we've heard, well, it doesn't do this, doesn't it? I'm like, yeah, but guess what? If you need to, you can text. If you need to, you can call. Right. And I'm not dealing with the phone, with the camera, with all the apps. So, we kind of narrowed it down. So we've got the basics of what we need. And she's got the watch. And as a parent then, like, she wants to walk down the street to Starbucks, text me when you get there, text me when you get home. And by the way, I can flip open my phone using Find My and see where they are. Right. So that there's that degree of a connection or engagement. So this is using technology to kind of do some of the things that as parents you want to do, and then you got to kind of let them know here's how we're using it, right? So we've got that trade-off, but I know there's gonna be a point in time because now we're gonna be in 6th grade, so they all get on the bus, everyone's gonna be breaking out the phones. We've already said it's not going to happen 6th grade year to my oldest, so we'll see how long we get 2 years before we break down on that one. But we're going to put that up as long as we can.
It just makes me wonder what other challenges will. I don't have kids yet, but we both want to have kids in the future. What other challenges are yet to be seen? Because that seems like such a big deal. I mean, I can only imagine. You get on the bus when you're a kid. Because what did we do when we were a kid? You get on the bus and it's comparison, right? As you walk down the aisle, it's, what shoes do they have? It's just natural. You do that as a kid. And
we do that as adults getting on an airplane, by the way, too.
Literally, right? You're like, what do you do? First thing you do, you walk by first class.
Yeah.
That's not it. First class gets on the plane first, and then you walk by first class if you're not sitting there. So it's like, yeah, we do it as adults, we do it as kids. And you can just picture, I mean, if you close your eyes, you can just picture the kid on the bus that's boisterous and loud and cool, and they got the newest phone and the big screen, and they're watching stuff that probably shouldn't be watching in front of their kid. And that's just a powerful environment that didn't exist when, or it does. I guess I backpedal, like it does exist. It just exists in different degrees of expression.
Yeah,
and now it's pretty expressed.
Well, I mean, think about it this way. You got on the bus and you had the kid who had the latest clothing, right? So they had the jacket, the sunglasses, the high tops, right? And it's like, man, that kid is pretty cool, right? He's got the perfect hair, right? And then you got the other one who, they got, their older brother's clothes that don't quite fit right. I mean, we've seen it in different ways, and it's just representing itself in a piece of metal and plastic in somebody's pocket right now.
Historically, too, the kid with the cool sunglasses and stuff, they peak senior year. And then it's all, downhill from there. So don't be jealous, kids.
Well, no, I mean, I'll tell you what. I mean, one of the biggest eye-openers, I went back for a class reunion, and, we had a 5-year and a 10-year and so forth. And you saw those kids, the best years of their life were 17, 18 years old.
I know. It's so weird how that happens. That's the whole computer science thing. I mean, I remember being in school, and computer science was such it was such like a random point of study that at the time, I was still told to learn the cursive alphabet because colleges wouldn't accept your unless you hand wrote your acceptance letter. Like, that's insane. And to see that in that time, computer science really became the coolest thing of all. I mean, if you look at the public sphere right now, you got guys like Elon Musk, right? Who could be quirkier and weirder than Elon Musk? And he's born in a different time, it would be labeled as just a full-blown nerd loser, but he's not. He's like this innovator, and he's a little off socially, but he's doing great things. And so there's this new channel or new road available for those that are fascinated by this kind of stuff, by data,
yeah,
by
I think
numbers,
that's probably the
by
one really
math,
cool thing that comes out of this, right? Is that, I mean, we're learning there's a place for everybody, right?
Yeah.
And and it's okay that you didn't figure it out in high school. It's probably okay you didn't figure it out in college. It's it's your ability to find your place that you're going to flourish. I mean, our former CTO that I used to work with at SVDS, he used to call it, it's revenge of the nerds.
Yeah,
right. All these kids
were
ridiculed, made fun of, and look at the guys who are getting valuations of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars because of some code that they wrote. I mean, and they're the ones now who are driving the big cars and coming back to the high school reunions all flashy because they've earned it, right? I mean, you wouldn't have guessed that kid in the back of the classroom or in the front of the classroom getting spitballs thrown at him was one day going to be a CEO of a $1 billion company.
Right, and and the jock all-star quarterback dude's got like a landscaping company in his hometown or something. It's like it is
maybe
really
he twisted his knee his senior year and never did anything since. Yeah.
Did in your career, you had I'd like to maybe just unpack this timeline a little bit because I'm sure I'm going to butcher it. But if I'm understanding the timeline correctly, during your time at Deloitte, you also ran for Congress, right?
I did.
So how do you one, balance both of those at the same time? Because it wasn't like you, it's not like you worked in the snack bar at Deloitte, right? Like you're in
No,
senior
right,
management. You've been there a long time. Your career is moving along. I can't imagine taking on that type of endeavor at the same time that you're in your career. So how did you manage those two things?
Well, I mean, one of the things that became apparent. So yeah, so this was the 2010 congressional cycle, and that point in time, I mean, most of my career had been in healthcare. I mean, I'd been at Baxter and been consulting healthcare companies, and this is when the healthcare debate was in full swing. And one of the things that frustrated me was I didn't see people actually understood how healthcare worked. We're talking about technology and Zuckerberg's example. At that point in time, I didn't see people who actually understood the healthcare system being part of the conversation. And I'm just by my wiring, I'm like, okay, I can yell at the TV or whatnot, or I can try to be a part of the solution. So when I decided to run, I had to take a leave of absence from Deloitte because they're a federal contractor. So there had to be that distance between my job as a senior manager at the time and in the work I was going to do as a congressional candidate. So I took a leave of absence for about 6 months to go run that campaign. And then came back and picked up where I left off, and the experience I had by doing that were very different than the experiences I had in my tenure at Deloitte. And it was fascinating when you came back. I mean, because you bring it's almost like doing an internship. Like you come back, right. It's like, what did you learn? What was it like? So it changed the kind of conversations and the kind of didn't change the consulting that I did, but it definitely gave me a different way of approaching the problems like how my clients were dealing with. But yeah, that was a leave of absence for the 6 months to do that.
What were some of those takeaways? I mean, that's a unique thing to go and do, and it's not a low-hanging fruit thing to do either. I mean, that's a big investment of your time, your energy, the campaigning, looking for people to support you. I mean, walk me through that process a little bit and some of the takeaways there.
Yeah, I think first of all, I mean, and it kind of probably is what I'm doing right now. It's just like starting a new business in many ways, right? I mean, you've got to go find supporters. The supporters are going to help work with you, or they're going to help finance you. So, right. So there's a lot of parallels between that and a startup. But something I thought were really interesting is, when you run, I ran into the Republican primary, and I kind of went in with this notion of how I wanted to be, provide solutions and ideas how we could solve the healthcare problem. Well, that was always important to me. And you start talking to people, and there's other things that are top of mind to them. If it's around marriage or abortion or guns, I mean, you think about, there's a whole calling card of the common Republican, things you have to align with to get the support of the party. And some things I just have an opinion on. I mean, I've just never thought about them. They were never in my purview in my lifestyle. So, I mean, so you had to understand some of those problems. And you also had to understand the process of going through and talking to people that were very passionate about them. And they didn't care about this, they cared about that. And if you didn't have a point of view that resonated with them about that, they were very quick to move on to the next candidate. So it was learning, kind of what the hot topics are and what the hot buttons are of people. It was also learning that there's people out there that, it was, I'll give you an example. We went to a candidates event and someone's grilling me on these set of topics. And all of a sudden I start listening and I'm realizing, okay, so that's this pundit, that's this pundit, that's this pundit. They're just reciting somebody else's talking points back at me and wanted me to respond to them. And it, as a candidate, you kind of wanted to say, okay, what do you really think? Because I know what those guys think too, because I hear their stories as well. But what is it you think? And you realize as a candidate, it's a voter, right? I mean, they're not the one interviewing for the job, you are. So you kind of have to get those, reconcile those things. So that was a big learning as well. Is kind of, you can tell where people are getting their. We're seeing it today too, right? You can tell absolutely where people are getting their information and where they're forming their points of views. And that's probably an entire topic in and of itself. What happens with the media and the news cycles. But you start to put those pieces together, and you have to start to figure, okay, am I going to get pulled over in this direction to just try to win a primer, or am I going to stay right here in my lane? This is what I do, and if I don't have a view, if I don't agree, the consequences will be what they are.
Sounds to me like a big part of that was like listening, your ability to listen to the people that you're talking to without letting that wall come up, which is, I mean, that's kind of a lot about like this type of stuff, right? Podcasting is, you always have a desire to say. Everyone does. It's part of conversation, and we're conditioned to do that from a very young age. You want to get your piece across. You don't want to miss your opportunity to say the smart thing that you think you should say.
Yeah.
And in doing that, unfortunately, you can miss the biggest opportunities to really get the nugget or to talk to the person about the most interesting thing. So when you were in those situations and you're campaigning, it sounds like there was a conflict between you wanting to uphold your personal values while also recognizing that there's this game that you could totally play if you want to play it.
Exactly.
Do you want to be that guy?
Yep.
And is that what it came down to?
I mean, the result of that race didn't really come down to that, but I would say that was some of my takeaway, right? I mean, I would say that the growth that I did through that was just recognizing where I wasn't going to make trade-offs. And if I wasn't the right candidate because I wasn't going to make those trade-offs, that's probably the right consequence.
Right.
Right. And you learn to reconcile those things. But yeah, I mean, you can tell those people who, want to, bullies are stronger, but really want to push you to adopt their point of view. Mm-hmm. And then once you say what they want to say, they're happy and they move on. And they forget that you basically parroted back what they said. I mean, I saw this happen with other candidates. They'll eventually parrot back what you say and they'll move on. And then they'll go to the next person. And we see it. Look, watch any of the talk shows at night, right? I mean, the same person will pivot through whatever that person's trying to push them to say.
Right.
So they get the ratings, they get the soundbite, and they can go on and kind of go on their merry way. And I think that's, that's some stuff I took away from it. So it was interesting from that perspective. The way I describe running for office, it's actually two jobs, right? You have the job of the candidate, and then you have the job of the office you're running for. And there's some people who are phenomenal candidates, right? They can raise all the money, they can host the big events, they can win all the party support and get all the endorsements. But when they go to office, I mean, they're an atrocious legislator, as an example. Right. And I think one of the big compliments I took away from it was, is that a lot of people say, hey, listen, I can't support you in the primary because so-and-so is my guy. But if you go on to the general, I'm going to get behind you because I believe in who you are. I believe in your values. You listen to me, right? All those things that you'd want in an elected official. But it just didn't have the air of, I'm the big guy in the room. I'm getting all the endorsements. I'm getting all the money. So that's some of the trade-off too. It's like, which role are you trying to fill? Are you trying to fill the role of the candidate, or are you trying to fill the role of the office you're going after?
If you could, kind of reflecting on that process, having gone through it and really thrown yourself at it, what would you improve to make that a more genuine, experience? It maybe, to me, sounds like there's a lot of gamification going on there between candidates and essentially the popularity contest that we all know is going on in that scenario. What's something that you would adjust to maybe get a more righteous outcome there for the people that are running, and then also for the people?
Yeah, I mean it's super simple. It's making sure you've got the runway and that you've got the notoriety and you've got the support before you even enter the race. Mm-hmm. If I were ever to do it again, I mean, I've kind of, some people kind of say, would you do it again? Would you do it again? I mean, the only way I would do it again if I knew that I could, get to the primary with as little friction as possible. So that means you've already got support, you already got name recognition, you already got funding for the campaign. So, I mean, the classic example is if you can drop into a campaign and let's say you've got, whatever the magic number for that came, let's say $500,000 already donated to you, already lined up, that kind of stuff will keep people away who are maybe exploring but don't have the financial support. So it's how quickly can you make sure that, you reduce that pool quickly.
Right.
And again, and the things you do are the right things, right? So you get people who are going to support the campaign because they believe in who you are. You get people who are going to endorse you because they believe in who you are. So you've got the name recognition support, and it's basically all right, this is Geissler's. We're all going to step away here because no one else is going to take him out because he's got everything lined up. He's got the staff. He's got the support in order to make it happen. I think that's probably the one thing I would make sure was in place before I would ever do it again.
Did that change your leadership strategy when you went back to work in the corporate setting?
What it did, I would say people always recognize I had a high emotional intelligence, but I would say that was a multiplier effect. Because especially when you go back to Deloitte, people wanted to know what it was about. And one of the things I learned is that, there's people who were friends of mine that they were lifelong Democrats. Mm-hmm. And they were trying to pull me into some sort of argument. I said, listen, I can tell you both points of view, right? That's one of the things I learned is I learned to appreciate all the points of view that are out there.
Yeah.
And I learned that I could make a case for either one. There's not a good or bad or right or wrong. You can make strong cases for either. So I'd say the big thing I took away was being able to listen and appreciate the diverse points of views that exist being able to articulate them fairly without bias, and then have a meaningful conversation. I think it's probably the one thing I learned is that, at the end of the day, I really got excited about the policy discussions. Like not what is the problem, but how do we together solve the problem? Like what is the right policy that resolves the majority of people's needs? And again, you have to be able to listen to all points of views in order to be able to do that.
I really like hearing that because I'm convinced that, and maybe this is one of the reasons I love doing this so much. I mean, it truly is like a flow state for me, just being here. I really, really love having these conversations with people. So I really think that that's the thing, that's where you actually make progress, because you're right. There are, in any situation, there are points on both sides of the coin.
Right.
Accept that. Then let's actually talk about what's going on. And more importantly than that, know that you might be wrong in this situation. And that's like, it's rare that you come across a conversation with someone where they truly enter it with you to learn.
Yeah.
From the conversation itself. It's so easy to end up and just bicker and fight with each other and catapult your opinions onto the other person. I mean, we're all guilty of it. But
Yeah.
I do not see a way out of the calamity that we're in right now as a country unless people can sit down face to face and say, why do you think this? And actually mean why, not why do you think this? I want to put my piece in. And they're really just waiting to jump in and say their thing.
Yeah.
Because we're just more of this. It'll just be more division, because then when you get met with resistance against someone else, what are you going to do? You're going to look for approval. So who are you going to look for approval from? Someone to your right or to your left of you. And then they're going to give it to you. And then you're going to disregard the other person that you were trying to understand.
Exactly.
And just go, well, I was right.
Yeah. And I think when it comes down, I mean, and there's a couple things that are interesting about it. I think, first of all, I think we're people, what most people who watch politics and media play itself out is they see the people who generate the sound bites, right? They're attention getting, they're loud, they're prolific. I mean, so everyone thinks everyone in Washington or everyone in, wherever your major, political area is, those are the people who are doing all the work. I mean, then you have to recognize that there's people behind them, sometimes staffers, sometimes others who are elected in that same office, like you think at a legislative level, that are learning how to talk to each other and make trade-offs. I mean, you hear about the examples, like if you go to a dinner table in D.C., you'll see, both congressional parties represented because they're all friends outside the office. I mean, you hear about the Supreme Court, right? They all talk about how they're actually a group of friends when they're not, working at topics on the bench. And I think that that's where things really happen. But, right now, the state of media is we're given these outrageous personalities that grab sound bites. So we think that that's how everyone in D.C. thinks and works. To some degree it is. And by the way, those people are out there being outrageous personalities because they were probably some of the same candidates I was talking about a moment ago. But they're also ones who are getting dollars and getting support and building clout. But they're not the ones necessarily passing policy or legislation. And I think that that's where we can probably feel a lot better is like when legislation goes through with strong bipartisan support, those kinds of conversations are happening.
Well, and hopefully we can get to a place where that's more understood. I think the sound bites and the pundits and the people that are maybe more brash in their approach and their opinions that show up on this tabloid or that header or this Instagram reel, it's the same reason that as someone who spends a lot of time on social media trying to give people what I would think of, I hope, is beneficial information. I'll talk specifically about like the ski system, right? So my goal there is I want to give people the information necessary to make informed choices about their training so they can ski better. That's like the genesis of what it is.
And I love it, by the way. I'm a fan, right? Right there, fan.
And then in expression of that, there's a conflict because the algorithm wants someone who sees the thing to stay watching the thing long enough to where another video similar to the thing can be suggested so they stay on the platform. That's not very conducive to sharing beneficial information because sharing information takes a while. If I want to sit down with you, the viewer, and tell you about the benefits of doing compound movements for your ski season, already just in me saying that took 10 seconds. You're not watching the video anymore. So what do? You make something really flashy and catchy and in your face and big and like, with noises and sounds and transitions and jumps and cuts and all this stuff that is so far away from the actual thing that you're trying to do.
Yeah.
But it's the only way to generate traction within the algorithms. And if you
Let me
look
ask you
at
a question on that, because this
Go ahead.
topic fascinates me. This topic fascinates me because, getting back to data, right? As a linkage in all these things, I completely get what you're saying, right? Because there's that desire to create those things, content followers, because that's a metric somebody created.
Yes.
Right? Someone created that as a metric, and that demonstrates somebody's value. So, for example, if you post something and you have 1 like versus 1,000 likes, does that mean the post isn't good? I mean, like there was a while I was doing stuff on Instagram just purely as an experiment to myself around accountability. I didn't care if anybody followed it, but I said, I'm putting this out there. And the fact that I'm putting this out there, it basically says, hey, you put this out there. So you told people today you're going to do these 3 things or you're going to do this workout. And it is purely as an accountability check. And a handful of friends liked it. It wasn't for my friends. It was for myself. So I guess the question I have for you is when you create that content and do that kind of programming, what is the metric you're using to demonstrate that it's accomplishing your goal?
So in the social media sphere, so here's the way that, like, in my head, this funnel is working, is that traction on a social media channel, a growth of an audience, and then that audience is engaging with what you're actually doing. Because having a big group of people that aren't listening doesn't mean anything. Mm-hmm. But the only thing that matters is that any of those numbers convert to subscribers, paid subscribers on the website, right? Because that's what produces a drive to keep going, and that's what gives you feedback that what you're producing is actually benefiting the people that are subscribing and that are utilizing everything. So on one side of it, you want the social channel to grow because that growth does seem to parallel subscription and membership and awareness.
Right.
But it's not a direct correlation. So you can, for example, I could reference a video that I used recently on the ski system that gets the best traction I've ever got on Instagram. Most engagement, the highest reach, likes, shares, comments, bookmarks. Didn't correlate at all to subscriptions. So monetarily, the subscriptions matter the most, but in terms of like a growth strategy on social media, all those other metrics matter the most.
Yeah, so I think that I think you're spot on to something there, right? Because you're really talking about it as a pipeline, a funnel, right?
Yeah, it's
and all these
channels.
It's
another marketing funnel.
Exactly. So if someone were to say, hey, tomorrow, hey, by the way, our research says skywriting over Vail, Colorado in November will drive, engagement. You'd probably explore it, right?
Well, and especially if you could draw a correlation directly to, membership. And
right.
I guess that goes back to more like what's the goal of the account in the first place. So if someone's goal is to leverage their following to get paid partnerships, right? They're probably going to do anything that's just going to generate views, traction, and engagement at kind of any cost. But if you're not looking to do that, at the end of it, and this is something I've realized recently in this experiment of launching the ski system, is for a year, I was overlooking just general on-page SEO for the website. And in analyzing that, I went, wow, this is terrible. This page will never be discovered because organically in its current state, there's nothing actually pointing to what people are searching for when they're searching for a ski workout, the right exercises to do for the ski season. And that's a fault of me putting it in my language as a coach, not in the language that will be discovered by a potential user.
Yeah.
And so when I saw that, I was like, wow, here's a huge missed piece of the puzzle because so many eggs are being put in the social media basket when, as you just touched on, it's another opening in the funnel, right? It's social media, it's blog posts and SEO optimization, being featured on, podcast shows, whatever, however you can tailor all those to just bring more people in the top and then really, really get granular on how you spit them out into the membership site.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself is a whole nother conundrum of trying to solve because it's very difficult to do that, I'm fine.
Yeah, so one of the things I was thinking about, Abe, is you're going through your pipeline and your customers. I think a lot about the customers you're taking on, and you probably are getting enough data, like how many times people are logging on the site and their behaviors and whatnot. And what I'd be curious about is if you've been able to figure out like which customers are like the best customers you're getting in because they have the highest degree of engagement, they have the highest degree of feedback, they're demonstrating success versus, hey, you put the offer out there for, the first month free and I signed up and then, I cancel it, on day 31. Are you getting a sense of that from, from the usage patterns on your site?
Yeah, so it's actually been interesting to watch that kind of stuff between some of the things that they built when I had the web developers build the actual site from scratch. They put a couple things into the back end to track like use time, engagement, what users are doing what when they're on the site, and then combining that with Google Analytics to actually just look at like, okay, how much time is spent on this page? When you're on this page, what things are clicked? When this is clicked, what does that go to? What's someone's, when they start a training program, on a workout day, how long do they stay in the program? Do they start and log off? Like, it is interesting. To be honest, it's so much information for someone that hasn't spent a career analyzing data outside of, like one-on-one fitness stuff. It is so much information that in some sense it's overwhelming. And I think that in the original stint, that's why I overlooked just search engine optimization as a whole, because it seemed like too big of a mountain to climb. But having taken it now and then cut it up into little pieces to work towards, it becomes much more manageable. And you get some phenomenal insights. I mean, for a while, there was more engagement in Europe than there was in the United States, which was just a complete random byproduct of how things spread on social media. But
interesting.
When that happens, it does help you make informed decisions about where you could, direct your efforts both monetarily and then personally on creating content that really drives that group of people. It ended up evening out, and now it's much more split between the United States and Europe and Canada. But in the original part, it made me want to make all these decisions around that piece, right? Without taking into account everything.
Well, so context, right? We were talking about that earlier, the context, right?
Totally. So yeah, it's been really fun.
And I think that's really a cool opportunity is like, when you again, go back to this notion of data, it's trying to figure out things like, who is my ideal customer? Like who, I may have a hypothesis of what they look like. So when, a lot of times when I join I'm doing some consulting for an organization, talk about customers, like describe your ideal customer to me in terms of data. Right. Like, what does that look like? Because
what kind of answers do you get from that?
Well, what's funny is most people don't think about it that way. I mean, like for example, when I joined a team one time and I was trying to get a sense, like, I joined in a business development role, focusing on healthcare, and I said, give me a sense of like your best customers. What do they look like? Like, how long do they take to buy? How long are they on? How long are we working with them? What's the average revenue? Like, just some demographic kind of stuff. And what I really found fascinating is most people don't think about that. But then you have to start to lay out questions. Okay, so for example, what would a good customer look like? If you can't describe them, what would they look like? Right. And you start to see interesting patterns. And, I think that's the opportunity. So for example, like you might think your sales cycle is 30 days. When we actually look at the data, like your CRM as an example, we might realize it's 3 months. And that's not a good or bad. It's like, let's start to manage expectations. And can you bring in a couple days? No, actually it's about 3 months, and here's why. Okay, great. So then let's set an expectation. 30 days or 3 months is how long it's going to take to take someone from prospect to purchase. And then let's take those signals and make decisions and plans based upon it. So for example, if you're coming into the end of the year and you've got a forecast to hit whatever, and your pipeline isn't active by July or August, you're not going to make your number by December, right? Because you can't close deals in faster than 3 months. So that's some of the stuff I like to have conversations with people about when it comes to the data and how they're using their data to make informed decisions.
Speaking of informed decisions, when you decided to leave, you went from Deloitte to PricewaterhouseCoopers, right?
No, I went to Silicon Valley Data Science, SVDS. I went to go join the tech startup. And
then you left that to start your own business.
Yeah, so the trajectory was Baxter to Deloitte. Yeah. And then Deloitte took the detour to do the congressional run, and then joined Silicon Valley Data Science, or SVDS. I love that place. That was a great place. They were acquired by Apple, Apple
Yep.
basically said, we like your data scientists, we like your engineers, we like your architects. We can't hire a team fast enough, so they came in and acquired our assets.
Wonderful.
I went to PwC. I had some people recruiting me to join them at PwC, and did that for about a year and a half, and then had an opportunity with a former colleague of mine to start to stand up what we're calling Asgard Data today, which is a whole different way of thinking, but it's been a blast putting it together.
When you reflect on these different decisions in your career of going from, I mean, I think, if you could go back and talk to a college kid who's about to graduate, and you're like, hey, you're going to get to go work for one of the big four accounting firms, and you're going to have a tremendous career there for 11 years. They'd probably be pretty happy, right? Like that's be pretty sufficient. When you look at your decision to leave there, when you look at your decision to leave Silicon Valley and more of like this tech startup environment, and then to go out on your own, were those all just charge ahead decisions? Did you feel fear, anxiety around those? What was it like to make those jumps each time that you did that?
Yeah, they've become. I mean, they've become easier over time. I think. I mean, I'll use my transition from Baxter to Deloitte. Right. I mean, my first job. Right. I mean, I'd been there a handful of years. Everyone knew me. I mean, everyone there had successful careers. 30, 40 years at the same company, kind of stuff. And I just realized I developed a skill set that just wasn't going to give me a lot of career opportunity. And
Right.
it wasn't anything disparaging. It's like, okay, here's the things I'm doing and really flourishing at. I don't see how they fit here, and the opportunities weren't presenting themselves. And I had some friends who were in the consulting space, and we had done some project work together, and they got me introduced to Deloitte eventually, and I was with them. A similar kind of thing at Deloitte, right? I mean, I realized there's a little bit of a square peg and round hole. For as much as I tried to fit that model, you just realize there's just points in times that, I describe it as this. When I was at Deloitte, there was another individual I hired at the exact same time. And, nothing disparaging about it, but we said very different alignment and career aspirations. Like mine was to just get deep into the consulting and helping solve really complicated healthcare problems. He was very career oriented. And over time, you start to see how those decisions and trade-offs manifest itself in opportunities. I was doing really great consulting work, but my path to partner, which is kind of what those models are all designed to move you towards, was starting to diminish. I mean, there's fewer and fewer opportunities, and especially as you kind of get further along, it's like your brand is taking you here and the partner brand goes here, so you have kind of a square peg and round hole kind of thing. So I was starting to already get a sense of that, if I wanted to stay there, I was going to have to make some very deliberate trade-offs. So the things I wanted to do or the opportunities that were going to present themselves. And then I had an opportunity to go join SVDS. It was the perfect opportunity, right? I got to try on a lot of different hats in a small organization, help build something. And then, like I said, Apple acquired us after about 2.5 years or so being there, and I had a chance to rejoin some of my Deloitte colleagues at PwC, and it was a great opportunity. The aspiration was to very much build the same kind of small incubator tech, data product kind of company, and again, it kind of became apparent quickly that again, great organization, great people, but just the things I wanted to accomplish didn't align itself with where the organization was going to go. And then I stayed engaged with a former colleague of mine, and we had an opportunity to start to dig in what's become Asgard Data.
And has that been a quick and smooth transition, or are you dealing with hurdles and all sorts of road
Every
bumps?
day is another hurdle. Every day, but it's one of those things. I think you can appreciate it because your career seems like it's gone through some of the same things that when you really dig into something that's mentally and emotionally and physically challenging, you feel growth. Right. Even if you're not even if the wins aren't on the board, you're growing and you have a forward moving trajectory. And that's really, really been one of the special things about it. I mean, we've built a pretty special culture early on, and the people have helped us, even as interns and as kind of temporary, volunteer help. I mean, everyone's had a really good experience for it. So it's been incredibly rewarding. But every day there's another hurdle. Every day there's another opportunity. You wish you would have done something differently. But, for all of those, I still wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah, I feel like it's in those moments that it's the most growth, but it's the most fulfilling because you could be doing it for somebody else, and you're not. And even if there, monetarily if you could just look into the future and you go, okay, I know that if I'd stayed at Deloitte, it would have been monetarily X. there's a point at which like that doesn't matter. It's because the growth and the individual development and the ability to impact a team, a group of people, a community, create a culture, that is the living in the now. That is the most enriching environment that you could probably be in.
Yeah.
And there's something about that then when you're in that position, you end up creating it's like you're doing the best expression of yourself. You're living up to your potential. And that is like, I mean, I think that's the biggest fault of anyone is to come. And my biggest fear as an individual is to not live up to what my imagined potential could be. And so to at
and
least
explore
know,
the fringe, right? Explore the fringe.
Yes.
I mean, go right to the edge and see what that's like. And you know, there's a lot of fear and anxiety in it. But when you realize that, first of all, I mean, nothing I'm doing is death defying, right? It's not like I'm going out on the front lines. I'm taking any sort of physical risk. I mean, there's reputation risk and financial risk. But I honestly believe that if you do good work and you put good things out there, good things will come. They may not happen as fast as you want them to, but when you can kind of at the end of the day, maybe in the longest day of your life, you may have had tons of really hard phone calls or whatever it comes down to, you can kind of say, we did something good today though. Yep. Right? We moved the needle for somebody. We gave somebody some value. I mean, that's the exciting part about all of this.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on here. I'm sure we'll have to do this again. There's a lot of points that we covered but didn't dive deep enough into.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Abe, thank you so much, man. I appreciate the opportunity.